morning, everyone. I'm Ann Evans. I am a member of the leadership group at Ashoka, and I want to welcome you all to this session on moral and spiritual grounding for change making. I would like to thank the Fetzer Institute for its support of this session in so many ways, with a mission to help build the spiritual foundation for a loving world. The Fetzer Institute supports work in a variety of areas, including the health of our democracy, the landscape of spirituality in society, and education. So you can learn more about the Fetzer Institute at www.fetzer.org. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to cover a few quick points. We ask for your mindful presence here today by turning off other devices or notifications and by keeping your video on, unless you must take a break, and keep yourself muted unless you're speaking, please. Also, I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from land in Virginia that is the ancestral and unceded home of the Manahoic people, and I wish to express my respect for them. And if you wish to understand more about the indigenous people whose ancestral lands are where you live, you can do this by looking at the link that I'm putting into the chat right now. And I encourage you to do that. At Ashoka, we talk about change making as love and respect in action for the good of all. And of course, a key aspect of change making is this focus on the good of all, the common good. As we look at the topic of moral and spiritual grounding, we're examining what underpins a worldview that's focused on the common good. And how can we help shape such a worldview is a really interesting question. So we're curious about, for example, how a person's moral and spiritual beliefs and experiences influence their leadership and their change making. How does spiritual and moral grounding play into our sense of purpose? How does spiritual and moral grounding affect how people deal with others and their ability to engage others in their change making efforts? And does consciously cultivating or nurturing a spiritual or moral awareness contribute to one's ability to be effective as a change maker? And if so, what practices are important? So we're going to discuss today 3 studies that drew our attention because each of them pointed to the importance of moral and spiritual grounding in relation to change-making work, but each in its own distinctive way. The first of these studies is the Fetzer Institute's study of spirituality in America. And it's a nationwide look at the broad question of what religion and spirituality mean in our lives and how they inform our actions. Jillian Gonda, who is the director of movement building for the Fetzer Institute, is leading Fetzer's work on this study and is here to talk with us about it. The second is a study done by Ashoka and McKinsey & Company using in-depth interviews. And it surfaced new leadership lessons from 120 system change leaders, many of them Ashoka Fellows. This study sought to understand what drives these leaders and what contributes the most deeply to their success. Joining us is Valeria Budnich, the scholar in residence at the Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship at MIT's Sloan School of Management. And she was one of the leaders of this study during her time at Ashoka and will share their questions and findings. And the third study is a longitudinal study done by the Interfaith Youth Corps, looking at how interfaith and diversity experiences shape worldviews and change-making actions of people on campuses across this country. Mary Ellen Geis, who is the Senior Director for Strategic Partnerships at Interfaith Youth Corps, has been leading this study over several years and can share with us the patterns that they are seeing emerge. So each of these studies, as you can probably guess, has richness that would be worth exploring for hours on its own. And we'll provide you with some links at the end so that you can do that. But today we're taking a particular look at how these 3 studies intersect on the question of how moral and spiritual grounding plays out in the work of change makers. So I'd like to start with you, Jillian. Is that okay? And we'll go directly to the question of how does one actually study spirituality in America?
Right, great question. And it was one that we certainly asked ourselves at Fetzer given our mission, helping build a spiritual foundation for a loving world, maybe it'd be a good idea to really understand what spirituality means to people today. Over the years and decades and centuries, likely, there's been an evolution of that concept and what it means to people. So before I get into how we did that and what we're learning, I think I'll take you into a bit of an exercise. First off, I just want to acknowledge and thank you all for being here. We're all in this kind of new normal together, and it's really important that we acknowledge it's an odd time, and this is kind of probably a constant running in our background, and we're all showing up in new ways and really remarkable ways. So this was such a new experience for Ashoka, and I'm so impressed, Anne, with you and your team of just how this has all been pulled off. So thank you for being present. I'll just add one more note of oddity. It's April, 19th, 18th in April here, and in Michigan, there are about 5 inches of snow outside. So, so here we are in an odd moment. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do, you should have this nearby. I don't care what kind of piece of paper it is. Find a blank piece of paper and a pen, a marker, whatever you have to write with. Hopefully, you all have just something blank and something to write with. Give me a nod or a thumbs up if you've got something. Okay, so we're going to start off with just a simple question. Draw for just a moment. No, this isn't an artistic contest, but just draw what spirituality means to you. So I'll give you about a minute here. Draw what spirituality means to you. All right. Can I maybe see some thumbs up if you've got pretty good drawing? All right, so you all should have the chat feature available. Maybe you can start first indicating for those that can access that to just type in what are some words that would describe your drawing, and then we're going to ask to look at them a little bit. So use that chat. Loving, wonderful. Yeah, thank you all so much. Great. Okay, can folks maybe just show up their drawings a little bit? Let's see some of this. I see love, self-respect, joyful, loving. I see hearts. There's my heart. Oh, look at that. Wow, I love those hands. Wonderful. Peace. Oh, there's a key. Oh, that's wonderful. Does maybe 1 or 2 people, just for just a quick minute, anyone want to volunteer? You can unmute yourself and share a little bit about why you drew what you did. Any brave volunteers?
I can share. My name is Jonathan, he, him, and I sort of had the odd one with the keys. And the reason why that came to mind is, for me, spirituality often has this duality of both bringing a sense of answering and unlocking certain things that we were unsure of, but also the reason why I tried to make it an infant behind each door key. You saw another one is because it also, each step that we grow, we also have a lot of new questions that we continue to think about. And spirituality is sort of the continuing getting answers, but also having new questions.
That's wonderful. Yeah, process of inquiry and a little bit of mystery in there as well. Thank you so much for sharing, Jonathan. Maybe one other?
I'll go ahead and go. My name is Manuela. I work at the University of St. Thomas. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And for me, it was the hands with a peace sign behind them that connected to prayer, connection, and peace. And I really believe that spirituality has a rootness in our community and how we relate to each other. So that's where my prayers and the peace part came in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And if anybody else would like to add into the chat, kind of your own, in your own language, what spirituality means to you, I'd love that, because it just adds to our own growing body of language around spirituality. So I'll share for just a moment before we go to the slide, and just to say, you know, that this was something that we really wanted and needed to do with the Institute, because given our mission and the changing, evolving nature of spirituality, its connection to religion, we really did need to and wanted to understand what this meant to people in the world. And we started off with a strong qualitative stage. And why don't we go ahead and go to the slide here? Just to say that this has been going on now for the past year and a half. Our intention was to do a broad study of spirituality in America. So really looking at the United States. And our purpose was really to understand this connection, as Anne alluded to, between spirituality and civic engagement. Whoops.
Excuse me.
Oh, it's on play mode, I think. There we go. So maybe, I don't know if we can pause it here. So this connection between spirituality and our social engagement, connecting with others. A few of you shared that in your comments, that it's more about just the individual experience of spirituality, but we connect with others. So our purpose, to understand what it means to people within and outside religion and how it informs civic action. We started off with a robust qualitative stage, 29 in-depth interviews, and a number of focus groups around the country. What we did in all of those focus groups is what you just experienced. We asked everyone to start into the conversation by drawing what spirituality means to them, and what a wide range of answers we discovered. We then, all the qualitative work informed a quantitative survey that we fielded just earlier this year of 3,600 Americans, using University of Chicago, NORC's AmeriSpeaks panel, which is highly generalizable to the American public. So we feel like we have really robust data here. Our early insights of what spirituality means is, well, a lot of people experience it. It's a very human capacity, and we know that. There's that wonderful quote out there. I'm going to butcher it probably, but we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I think that it's quite clear that a lot of people consider themselves to be spiritual, and many people engage in at least one or more religious activities a week. So 88%, that's a strong, high percentage. What we're also finding, and why we're so excited about this study in relationship to our partners in the world at Fetzer, like Ashoka, who are really interested in activating change-making work, is that there is a high correlation between how one sees themselves as spiritual and their civic life. And now correlation, for those of you that are kind of research folks, it doesn't necessarily point to the awareness of that connection, but when we did our survey, the different scales, those that are really studying how spiritual one sees themselves, and then also separately, the kinds of pro-social behavior they're engaged in, whether it's voting or volunteerism or community, some kind of community involvement, they're highly correlated. So their stronger spiritual or religious identity correlates with their pro-social attitudes and actions. Now, this is an interesting connection to this, is this awareness of the connection. So what we're finding is that varies. In a more general sense, people do say that their spiritual guides how they act in the world. But as it gets a little bit more specific, they may not make that connection as easily. 59% say their spirituality inspires them to give back to their community. Okay, that's still a little broader. 40%, a much less percentage, says that their spirituality influences their civic engagement. So it's a little bit more specific. And what we've discovered, particularly in the qualitative stage, and what we're excited about with the outreach that we'll be doing with this study this summer, is that when you make the connection, as we saw happen in a number of focus groups, for people that had that connection already, it was quite easy for them to describe that to other participants, and for the other participants to kind of have that real, aha moment, like, oh, right, I think there's a real strong connection between who I am on the inside and how that informs who I am on the outside. At Fetzer, we've long believed in this integration of the inner life with the outer actions, and we're excited about what we're learning in America that can help help do that work in a stronger way. So the connection is not always obvious, but once it's made, people, it's kind of like when you see something, then you can't unsee it. We hope with this research we'll be seeing, once you see that connection, it'll be hard to not experience that moving forward. So we'll be releasing our findings this summer and doing more to invite people into the findings and to experience it on their own. So stay tuned. We're still really sorting through all that we've learned. We have quite a bit of data, but this is just an early peek into that. And I hope that this has been helpful. Anne, am I good on time? Let's see.
Great. And thank you so much for this. We are going to have some chance also in breakout rooms a little later. And also we encourage you, if you have questions and you want to put them in the chat, please do that. We will hope to have some question time maybe at the very end, even if we do it in the 5 minutes after our official ending time. So we will enjoy having your questions and thoughts and comments in the chat as we go. To just continue to lay out the meat that we have here for you to chew on, let me turn now to Valeria. Valeria, can I interest you in sharing with us, please, the kind of work that you are doing is unlike the Fetzer, in that Fetzer's taken a great broad sweep look at America. And the study that you were involved with Ashoka and McKinsey really took a look at system change leaders in depth, and what about their leadership and their ability to have significant impact was driven by the moral and spiritual underpinning that they had, and how did that figure into it? We'd love to hear about that.
Thank you, Anne, and good morning, everyone. A real pleasure to be able to share this and learn from you on how you see this dimension of, in the case of this study, is what is the worldview of system changers? What is really, has been like the inquiry that we started our research journey, it had to do with, if everyone is a change maker, how can we trigger that kind of self-agency? How can we understand the type of experiences, the type of support systems or enabling systems that we need to create in order for change makers to thrive? So we went to what we know best in the Ashoka community, which is the leading system changers in the community. The way we approached the study with McKinsey was, let's dive deeper through in-depth conversations with leading social entrepreneurs on why they do what they do and how they go about doing it. And it wasn't so much like previous studies with McKinsey that had to do with business models and the sort of like the strategies. It was literally the sense of purpose, the clarity of intent, the journeys that led them to it, to do what they do. And once we did that through in-depth interviews, then we validated those findings and the framework that I'm going to share in a minute with other members of the community, other leading system changers, and also some Ashoka staff. Throughout the conversations that we had with them, what was more remarkable for me, it was actually an aha moment, because I wasn't expecting it, was that in the first 10 minutes of the conversation, we landed with each one of these change makers or leading system changers, we landed into a very specific moment in their life histories where they make deep and transformative choices. And for example, Patrick Struby, an Ashoka fellow that works on helping small farmers to access international markets. He was an international buyer working for leading multinational companies. And at some moment, he said if this life is going to kill me. This life is not meaningful to me anymore. I need to be on the other side of the equation. I need to be with the small farmers, but I don't have a clue on how to do that. So that then the story landed in an empathetic journey, that it was about understanding the needs of the small farmers from their perspective, and being humble to ask. I mean, even though he was an expert in the agricultural markets, he didn't know how the small farmers experienced it and what barriers they had and how he could, and I'm not, I mean, how he could support them. And if we have time, we could go into other cases. And now I would like to ask Anne if you could please share the slide so that we could talk more concretely on what is that worldview of the system changers? What is that, what are their fundamental beliefs? What are the way those fundamental beliefs manifest in their practices? So almost every entrepreneur, and particularly leading system changers, they start with that kind of self-agency of every problem is solvable. And that is very, it's sort of like it's grounded in their life experience and the way they have gone about their life in whatever context they are. What its importance is that it is not like we're often taught in universities and corporations and organizations, is not about a particular solution. The leading system changers are not married to the solution. They are basically assuming that there is more than one path to lead to what they want to do. For example, in the case of Patrick Struby, it was a constant iteration of multiple prototypes that led him into a very robust model that is constantly evolving, that is always close, having that feedback loop with the who he's intending to support, the small farmers that are part of his worldwide network. And if you go to the bottom left of the diagram, you will see that at a more personal level, in that kind of what Gillian referred to, and I love the way you phrase it, Gillian, when you said, who am I in the inside and how is this manifesting in the outside? That kind of dance, it's central in the life of the leading system changers. And for them, it's grounded in empathy and the assumption that everyone is well-intentioned. For example, in the case of Patrick, he didn't become an advocate against the practices of international companies. What he did was to create a win-win space, to create that kind of communication with champions that were ready to do differently. And they made what others may have seen as the industry exploiting X, Y, and Z. He basically saw it like a win-win solution in which he could find other outliers in the international agricultural markets that could make his own journey a common journey. And that is then, so if in the outer circle, what you have is the system and how they see the system, in the inner circle is fundamentally the personal choices that they make, and then in the center, what you have is how they build team and alliances. And that's when I was referring now on champions, and I mean, finding other champions that may not be directly in your team, but it become part of your extended team. And once we identify these fundamental beliefs and the practice of this, we went deeper into finding what are the principles under which the leading system changers operate. And I'm not going to focus that on this, but you could, if you're interested in learning more, there is an article that came out in last November in the McKinsey Quarterly that it's available that touches on more in detail on the practices. The next level of question that we ask to the system changers, once we identify the essence of their worldview, is how do you actually create the means, the path for others to join your journey? How do you help others to make your journey their journey? And invariably, they responded, both in the in-depth interviews and in the surveys, they talk about experiential learning and different ways in which they are innovating and creating conversations that help teams to create that shared sense of purpose. And permeating through all of this, almost like, if I would draw again this chart, I would put in the center of the chart an arrow pointing outwards, which is the clarity of intent. And I have to confess that until I met, until we had these conversations about the spirituality, I hadn't connected the clarity of intent with the spirituality in the broader sense. So I'm very intrigued in learning from you the kind of experiences that you either see as opportunities to create that clarity of intent, that shared sense of purpose, or the gaps that you see. And today, this year, I'm working at MIT as a scholar in resident and at the Legatum Center. And what I'm seeing within the Sloan Business School is an interest in creating this kind of exposing MBA students and also PhD students in more hard science to this concept of radical empathy and how does it manifest in the business models that they design or the innovations that they decide to pursue and how they go about them. And the Legatum Center has a program that engage between 25 and 30 students every year in precisely doing that. They declared an intention, an idea. They actually compete for a partial scholarship that Legatum provides. And then they go on in doing through a coaching and mentoring process what the original idea is about, and they iterate, they prototype, just like system change leaders do. And very important, they create a peer community between the existing 25 or 30 students and also the more than 200 that in the last 10 years have gone through this process. And with that, they have created, all of this, by the way, is pointing to emerging economies. So it's happening in Africa, in India, in Latin America. Among the things that they do is, for example, one of the students have created an ambulance service, a private ambulance service in Nigeria, that it's offering a service that it may be readily available in developed economies, but not in Nigeria. They are also creating, for example, mobile incubators to transport babies that are facing health emergencies from homes to hospitals in India, and so on. Many, many ideas. Now, the kind of question that I invite you that I was inviting you a moment ago to share your thoughts in the chat, it has to do with the need for these students to go the next level. The students tend to think about fulfilling a need, and they see the need has like one solution, but they are not yet at the stage of leading system changers in which they would see not just more than one solution, but the idea of truly seeing the system, going to the cause of the problem, going to daring to envision what system change leaders do, a new system for the good of all. So let me stop there, and and if you can help us and to flag anything that you may be seeing already in the chat.
Yeah, so I'd invite you all to say what is surfacing for you from what Valeria has said. She's talking about concepts of radical empathy, about the role of peer groups in being able to support intention. What is surfacing for you? Put a few words in the chat to let us know how this is landing for you. Great, we have someone else who's done a lot of thinking about this.
Oh my God, please send a link or dissertation. I would love to read.
That's right, great.
Notice that through these conversations with system changers, we were also building that link of whatever system you see or don't see will inform and define what kind of how far do you go on manifesting that purpose. And many times we don't see the profound broken systems in society. Right now we're all in the middle of one of those awakening moments. And that connection between the inner self and the ability to see systems in the whole, in their wholeness, it's one that we frankly need to cultivate more, particularly with the new generations. Otherwise, we will continue operating in the margins of developing solutions that are basically helping to solve one dimension of the problem, but not eradicating it. And with that, I leave you with Anne and the next presenter.
Yes, yes. I'd just like to hold up that in the chat, we have some interesting themes that we can come back to we're going to have some time for breakouts, and I'd love us to dig deeply into some of these questions in the breakout room. So let me just hold them up for a moment to you. One is that there is a focus on being aware of the why behind what we are doing. And that can be a powerful thing. And I think that Valeria's story of Patrick Struby was very instructive in that he realized that there was a sort of desperation he was feeling in his life as a trader that caused him to want to go back to the very grounding of what it was he cared about. And that self-awareness, I think, is a very important part of this. And it's that inner work that Jillian referred to. The other thing that I think is a really fascinating point is how does the work of system changers who are grounded in a spiritual and moral place differ from other effective, capable change makers? And that's a very good question put to us by Rob Garris. I'm glad Rob is here. So there are a couple of really important questions I think that we can work on. I would like to turn now to Mary Ellen. For years, Interfaith Youth Corps has been working on college campuses to help build an America where people of different faiths and worldviews and traditions can bridge these differences and find common values to engage in common action around issues that they share and concern. So we're interested in hearing more about the work that IFYC is doing and understand how the study that you're doing has helped you understand what experiences and activities actually contribute to a moral and spiritual grounding for these change makers. Love to hear what you're discovering in this many years study, Mary Ellen.
Great. Well, Thank you all so much, and thanks to everyone who's here with us. I know that I'm the person between you and conversation with each other, so I don't want to slow that down. I'm just going to highlight a few key findings. The study that I've been involved with is called the Interfaith Diversity Experiences and Attitudes Longitudinal Survey, which it took me several years to master that acronym, so that's one achievement of this study. IDEALS is what we call it. IFIC carried it out in partnership with Alyssa Rockenbaugh at North Carolina State University and Matt Mayhew at The Ohio State University. So it's been a long, fruitful collaboration with external research partners, sort of a research to practice partnership between IFIC and these researchers. A couple of things I just want to highlight about this study, and then we'll jump into some of the key findings that is useful for this group pretty quickly. It's a national study. It focused in higher education, so that's perhaps a little bit distinct from the other two studies that we've just we've heard about. It focused in on 122 participating higher education institutions. The participation was such that we can make national claims about the data, so we can say these trends are true across higher education. It's also longitudinal, so we tracked the same cohort of students over their entire collegiate experience. So we took 3 data capture periods, first when they were just entering college, second at the end of their first year of college, and third as they completed their 4th year of college, so that we could track how their experiences in higher education affected the particular outcomes that we are interested in the study, which I'll say more about in just a second. You can see what our sample looked like at the final data capture. It involved over 20,000 students over the course of the study. And it's a mixed methods approach. So we are in the process of analyzing some qualitative data alongside the quantitative data from the 3 survey periods. You all this is like sort of hot off the presses research. So we've been sharing findings as it's been coming out, but you all are really, you're guinea pigs for me in a way, in terms of sharing this. We have not yet published on these findings broadly. We'll be publishing a new research report on the newest set of data, hopefully in the next couple of months here, and look forward to sharing that with you all when it's out. In the meantime, these are some of the early practices that we are thinking about. First, I'll say before I go to what's on the slide in terms of some of the promising practices, we looked for 4 specific outcomes in the study. So we were really interested in a couple of key experiences and key attitudes and knowledge and behavior of what we were looking for in college students. So I'll run through them because I think it's really helpful to have a clear sense of what we were looking at, to think about those connections to change-making work and to the work that we are all doing as a group on college campuses. The first is we're looking at what we called pluralism orientation. IFYC focuses on this idea of religious pluralism, uplifting the importance of respect for religious identities, relationships across line of difference, and being able to identify and move on common action for the common good. So our understanding of pluralism orientation was, to what extent do college students care about these things? To what extent do college students think that this is important and valuable in society today? The second thing we looked at were appreciative attitudes. So we asked very specific questions about individual identities. To what extent do people appreciate evangelical Christians? To what extent do people appreciate people of different different racial identities? To what extent do people appreciate Muslims on campus? People from the Church of the Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. So we asked a battery of questions about specific identities. We also asked questions about the extent to which students gained religious literacy, so knowledge about different religious communities on campus, because we know there are very deep interconnections between accurate, appreciative knowledge about religious traditions and then appreciating and finding ways to bridge across those lines of difference. And then the last thing that we talked about was the importance of what we called, in very technological language, self-authored worldview commitment, which is basically the extent to which people have a fully formed, self-authored, if you will, an independently constructed sense of their own religious and spiritual commitments, which is deeply tied to the ability to bridge differences successfully. So these 4 ideas, pluralism, appreciative attitudes, religious literacy, and sort of an understanding of one's self-identity, we see all of these as deeply tied to the importance of change making. To what extent do people have an understanding of their own self and their own groundedness? To what extent do people have appreciation for differences? To what extent do people value the importance of bridging differences and bridging divides? And to what extent do people have sort of accurate information that they're operating from in all of these things? And so for people who care about those, achieving those outcomes, cultivating those outcomes among college students, what you have on your slide is some of the most important early findings that we're seeing. Again, hot off the presses, early findings of the types of things that we're seeing as effective. So the top two here are really instructive empirical practices for people who are creating learning experiences on campus. So for people who are running programs or teaching classes, these first two practices are really helpful. The first is that we've seen provocative encounters, this idea of interactions that challenge your previously held notions, creating learning spaces where people engage with others in such a way where their previously conceived notions, or they're questioning their assumptions about themselves, about others, about the world. So those kinds of learning experiences, whether that's in the curriculum, in the classroom, or in co-curricular spaces, finding ways to create these kinds of provocative learning experiences is really important for achieving those 4 outcomes that I just talked about. The second, which I think is heartening news for those of us who care about bridging divides, is the importance of interfaith friendship as really transformative learning experiences. So creating these kinds of intimate, personal relationships where you're able to learn in deep ways and build appreciation and common ground within the safe space of a friendship. These kinds of relationships, creating educational spaces on campuses where those kinds of friendships develop in natural ways is also another really important practice that we're seeing. Students who have high numbers of these kinds of friendships are achieving the outcomes that I just talked about in more in faster ways and more aggressive ways than students who don't have those kinds of friendships. The bottom two are more campus-wide recommendations, if you will. So people who are thinking on an administrative level, or perhaps folks who are going to administrators to make recommendations of what could we be doing to try to cultivate this kind of learning on campus. The first is there's this set of structured interventions. So through all the analysis that our amazing research partners have done, there's something of a recipe that they've come up with, which is that if you have at least one curricular interfaith learning experience, you have a class that engages something around religious diversity, you have a class that gives you the opportunity to build an interfaith friendship of a sort, one curricular or at least 2 co-curricular, so you go through a program that's around interfaith learning, or perhaps you encounter religious diversity training in orientation. If you go through 2 of those, then you're also higher likelihood of achieving the kinds of outcomes. So these are very simple recommendations we can take back to campus and say, how are we doing this? And then the last thing I'll say by way of closing is campuses that had expanded interfaith programs, so just the existence of interfaith programming, just the existence of policies that support inclusion around religious identity, inclusion around the importance of interfaith engagement on campus, just the fact of those programs and those policies meant that students were more likely to have the kinds of outcomes that we're looking for. So there's something to the institutional climates that we're creating and the way that we prioritize these things as higher education leaders makes an impact on our students, even if they're not necessarily directly involved or directly impacted by the structures that we're creating. So these 4, the provocative learning experiences, interfaith friendships, these very specific type and number of interventions, educational opportunities, and then the institutional climate. These are 4 big takeaways that we're looking at as far as how we can be accelerating interfaith learning, and appreciation for bridging difference and appreciation for individual difference as well. So I'll pause there, and as Anne said, we're really excited to get into breakout groups and start to be thinking together about how are we applying what we've heard from this research to our institutional practice, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts personally.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Really, really interesting. And one of the things that struck me, and that I think that you all as a group can take on in the breakout rooms that we're going to put you in just a moment, is this question of, when you think about provocative interactions and interfaith friendships and the ability that the muscle essentially that builds for being able to work with people who are different from you, to work with people in an attitude of respect and appreciation. It ties back also to what Valeria was saying, the system changers have learned, which is, that key to your success is going to be building teams of people and having respect for everyone as a powerful player. And if you know, we begin to see that some of the connections between what these studies are finding. So I would like now, Beta will help us do this. She will break us into groups of 5, 6, something like that. And we will have a chance to dig into some of this further. We'll put a couple of questions into the chat box for you. And let me just propose that you also reflect on what's coming up for you from these sessions, but from these discussions. But we can pose to you a couple of questions. How might we bridge the gaps between what we see, the work that's being done for the good of all, and the kind of worldview that sometimes we see in other parts of our lives? You know, how do we bridge that difference in gap, the difference between those working for the good of all, with the respect for everyone and the power of everyone to contribute, and those that don't? And how do we begin to bridge that gap? And how might we engage more students in these kinds of experiences that build this muscle for working across difference for the common good? So I would love to have you all play with these issues and give you a moment to do that. Beta, are you ready to do the breakouts? We'll come back at about 5 minutes to the hour. Yep. Yeah. Okay. I would ask that those of you, as you've come back in, let us put a couple thoughts into the chat, would you, about what came up for you in the session that you did as a breakout room. We are running now to the end of our time together. I want to share with you some links about the different studies. So hold on one second and I will get you that. So there you will, in a moment, have the links, and I will also put these same links in the chat, and perhaps Beta can help me with that. I don't know. But we encourage you to take a look at these studies. I also want to thank our participants and our panelists, all of you, for your contributions in this, and again to Fetzer for making this session possible. You can see that there's more information here. It's much more in the summer for spirituality in America, and also in late summer for the Ideals study. Already there's information available, the link there for the New Leadership Imperative study that Valeria spoke to us about. I also, we will be putting into the chat a survey, and if you would please fill that out for us, we appreciate that. And if you want to stick around for 5 more minutes, I think the panelists will be here for just another few minutes to answer any questions, and you can turn yourself off mute and ask us questions. But as we approach the hour, I just want to thank you all for coming, and we appreciate so very much having this discussion with you. Thanks.